It was September 1971 in a Warner Brothers executive conference room in Burbank, California. Clint Eastwood sat across from three studio executives, a contract spread on the mahogany table between them. The executives were trying to convince Clint to take a guaranteed $750,000 for starring in a film they believed would probably lose money. Clint was proposing something they thought was financially insane. He wanted to defer his entire salary in exchange for a percentage of profits from a film about a rogue cop that every other major studio had already rejected as too violent and unmarketable. The executives thought he was throwing away $750,000. Within 18 months, Clint's decision would make him one of the wealthiest actors in Hollywood and create one of the most iconic characters in cinema history. This is not a story about movies or money, or even about gambling. This is about conviction, calculated risk, and what happens when you believe in something everyone else has given up on. In 1971, Hollywood was in transition and crisis. The old studio system had collapsed. The safe formulas that had worked for decades were failing. Films were losing money. Audiences were changing. Studios were desperate for hits, but terrified of taking risks. Everything was focus grouped, test marketed, and designed by committee to offend nobody and appeal to everyone. This approach created safe, forgettable films that barely broke even. Meanwhile, independent films and new directors were taking chances, breaking rules, and occasionally striking gold. But the studio executives, trained in the old system, couldn't distinguish between good risks and bad ones. So they rejected everything that felt different, controversial, or challenging. Better to make a safe film that lost a little money than a controversial film that might lose a lot. Dirty Harry had been in development hell for years. The script, written by Harry Julian Fink and his wife Rita, told the story of a San Francisco homicide detective who breaks rules, ignores procedure, and uses extreme violence to stop a psychopathic killer. It was dark, morally ambiguous, and brutally violent. The hero wasn't heroic in traditional ways. He was angry, cynical, and operated outside the law he was supposed to uphold. Studios hated it. Too controversial, too violent. The character was unlikable. Audiences wouldn't accept a cop who acted like a criminal. The script was offered to every major star in Hollywood. Frank Sinatra was interested, but pulled out due to a hand injury. John Wayne read it and passed, saying the character was too dark. Paul Newman rejected it, calling the script fascist. Robert Mitchum, Steve McQueen, and Burt Lancaster all turned it down. By the time the script reached Clint Eastwood, it had become known in the industry as the project everyone rejected. Clint read it in one sitting. He saw something everyone else had missed. The character wasn't fascist or unlikable. He was a man exhausted by a system that protected criminals and failed victims. Harry Callahan represented frustration with bureaucracy, with rules that helped no one, with a justice system more concerned with procedure than justice. This resonated with something Clint understood deeply. He'd spent his entire career fighting studio bureaucracy, executives who thought they knew better, systems designed to control rather than create. Harry Callahan was the cinematic version of what Clint had been doing professionally for a decade, refusing to follow the safe path. Clint took the script to Warner Brothers, where he had a relationship through his Malpaso Productions company. The studio executives read it with obvious discomfort. Too violent, too controversial. The hero kills people without hesitation, tortures a suspect, operates completely outside legal boundaries. This will get us destroyed by critics, one executive said during the pitch meeting. It'll be called fascist propaganda. We'll have protest. It could damage the studio's reputation. Or, Clint said quietly, audiences might be ready for a character who actually does something instead of talking about it. The executives were unconvinced, but Clint had leverage. His previous films had made money. He directed efficiently and came in under budget. Warner Brothers agreed to make Dirty Harry, but with conditions. Tiny budget, $4 million total, minimal marketing support, limited release. They were hedging their bets, expecting the film to fail quietly without costing too much. Then came the negotiation for Clint's fee. His standard rate at the time was $750,000 per film, a significant sum in 1971. Warner Brothers offered that amount, expecting Clint to be grateful they were making his controversial film at all. Instead, Clint made a counter-proposal that shocked everyone in the room. "I'll defer the salary," Clint said. "Take nothing up front." The executives exchanged confused glances. "You want to work for free?" one asked. "I want a percentage of the gross instead," Clint said. 12.5% of all domestic box office revenue from the first dollar. The room went silent. This was not how deals worked, especially not for films the studio expected to fail. Percentage deals were for proven blockbusters, for sequels to successful films, for projects with guaranteed audiences, not for controversial cop movies that every other studio had rejected. Clint, the head of business affairs, said carefully, choosing his words like he was explaining finance to a child, "We appreciate your confidence, but we need to be realistic about this film's commercial prospects. It's extremely violent, morally questionable, and has been rejected by every major star in the industry. Our internal projections show this film earning maybe 8 to 10 million domestically, if we're lucky. That's not even double the budget. You'd be walking away from guaranteed money for a percentage of what will probably be a modest return at best. Or a huge return at worst," Clint said. "I believe in this film. I believe audiences want to see this character. I'm willing to risk my salary on that belief." Another executive jumped in. "Clint, think about this practically. $750,000 guaranteed versus a percentage of a film that might not even break even. That's not risk, that's financial suicide. Take the money, make the film, move on to the next one." "What's your confidence level in this film?" Clint asked directly. "Honestly," the executive replied, "low. We think it's too controversial, too violent. Critics will destroy it. We're making it because we believe in you as a filmmaker, not because we believe in the commercial prospects." "Then you should be happy with my proposal," Clint said. "If the film fails like you expect, you save $750,000. You get me essentially for free. If I'm wrong about audiences, you win. If I'm right, we both win." The executives conferred quietly. The logic was sound from a studio perspective. If Dirty Harry bombed as expected, they'd save $750,000. If it somehow succeeded, Clint would make money, but the studio would still profit enormously. It was actually a good deal for Warner Brothers. The only person taking a real risk was Clint. "We need to make sure you understand what you're walking away from," the head of business affairs said, pulling out a calculator. "Our projections show 10 million domestic gross maximum. 12.5% of that is 1.25 million. But that's best case scenario. Worst case, the film makes 5 million. You'd earn 625,000. Less than your guaranteed salary. And there's a real possibility the film makes less than that." "I've seen the projections," Clint said calmly. "I disagree with them. This film is going to connect with audiences in ways you're not anticipating." The executives looked at each other. They were being offered a deal where the biggest star in their controversial project would work essentially at risk, saving the studio money if the film failed. Only a fool would turn that down. "If this is really what you want," the head of production finally said, "we'll draw up the paperwork. But Clint, you're making a huge mistake. You're betting your entire salary on a film we don't believe in." "Then we'll find out who's right," Clint said. The contract was signed 3 days later. Clint Eastwood would receive $0 up front for Dirty Harry in exchange for 12.5% of the domestic gross from the first dollar. The studio executives genuinely felt bad for him. They thought he'd just made one of the worst financial decisions of his career. Some of them privately joked that Clint had been great while he lasted. But this was proof that actors shouldn't negotiate their own deal. Production began in April 1971. Clint directed with his usual efficiency, coming in under budget and ahead of schedule despite the challenging San Francisco locations. The studio provided minimal support, treating Dirty Harry like a B-movie being made to fulfill a contract obligation. Marketing budget was tiny. The release strategy was limited. Warner Brothers was already moving on to films they actually believed in. Dirty Harry premiered in December 1971 with almost no fanfare. Warner Brothers had booked it into fewer theaters than Clint's previous films. Critics who saw advanced screenings were divided. Some called it fascist, others called it brilliant. Pauline Kael wrote a scathing review calling it dangerous right-wing propaganda. Other critics praised its unflinching portrayal of urban crime and system failure. The studio braced for disaster. Then, something unexpected happened. Audiences showed up. Not just showed up, they packed theaters. Word of mouth exploded. People who'd seen it told everyone they knew. This wasn't just another cop movie. This was something different, raw, real, and thrilling. The "Do I Feel Lucky" scene became instantly iconic. Harry Callahan became a cultural phenomenon. By the second weekend, Dirty Harry was expanding to more theaters because of overwhelming demand. By the third weekend, it was Warner Brothers' biggest film. By the fourth weekend, studio executives were in emergency meetings, trying to understand what was happening. The film they'd expected to quietly disappear was becoming one of the biggest hits of the year. It played in theaters for months. The box office kept climbing. 8 million domestic, 10 million, 15 million, 20 million. The projections the executives had shown Clint were being shattered week after week. Dirty Harry finished its domestic theatrical run with over $36 million in box office revenue. Against a $4 million budget, it was one of the most profitable films Warner Brothers had made in years. Clint Eastwood's 12.5% of the gross totaled $4.5 million. He'd turned down $750,000 guaranteed and made 6 times that amount. The executives who'd felt sorry for him during the contract negotiation now felt something else entirely: humiliation. Clint had bet on himself when they'd bet against him, and he'd won spectacularly. But more than the money, Clint had created something lasting. Harry Callahan became one of the most iconic characters in cinema history. The film spawned 4 sequels. Clint's career trajectory changed permanently. He was no longer just a star. He was a star who understood audiences better than studio executives, who could identify material others missed, who had the courage to risk everything on his own judgment. The story of the Dirty Harry deal spread through Hollywood quickly. Agents started negotiating percentage deals for their clients, pointing to Clint's success as precedent. Studios became more cautious about declaring projects DOA before release, and every executive who'd sat in that conference room telling Clint he was making a financial mistake had to live with knowing they'd been catastrophically wrong. One of those executives gave an interview years later for a book about Hollywood deal-making. His quote became famous: "Clint sat in our office and told us he believed in that film more than we did. We had data, projections, precedent, all showing the film would fail. He had instinct. Turns out instinct beats data when the person has actually bothered to understand their audience. We were looking at demographics and test scores. He was looking at what people actually wanted to see. We thought we were protecting him from a bad decision. He was protecting himself from our limitation." Clint himself addressed the Dirty Harry deal in a later interview with characteristic brevity. "Studios wanted safe. Audiences wanted real. I understood which one mattered more. The executives thought $750,000 was a lot of money to walk away from. I thought betting on myself was worth more than their uncertainty. Turns out I was right. But the people who worked on Dirty Harry tell a more complete story. They talk about Clint's absolute certainty during production, his refusal to soften the character or compromise the violence, his insistence on keeping Harry Callahan morally complicated instead of simply heroic. They talk about how the studio kept suggesting changes that would make the film safer, more acceptable, less controversial. And they talk about how Clint rejected every single suggestion because he knew something the studio didn't. Audiences were ready for a character who wasn't perfect, who didn't follow rules, who got results through methods the system condemned. Harry Callahan was the anti-hero audiences had been waiting for. Today, Dirty Harry is considered one of the greatest crime films ever made, and one of the most influential films of the night. It changed how action films portrayed law enforcement, created the template for countless cop movies and TV shows, and proved that morally complex characters could be commercially successful. The scene where Harry Callahan points his .44 Magnum at a criminal and asks, "Do you feel lucky, punk?" has been quoted, parodied, and referenced thousands of times. That single line became part of American cultural vocabulary, and it almost didn't exist because every studio thought the script was unmarketable. The Warner Brothers executives who'd advised Clint to take the guaranteed money and walk away watched as Dirty Harry became a massive franchise, as the character became iconic, as their dire predictions about controversy and failure proved completely wrong. Some of those executives never quite recovered professionally. Their judgment had been exposed publicly permanently. Clint went on to negotiate percentage deals for most of his subsequent films. He'd proven he understood box office potential better than the people whose job was supposedly predicting it. Directors and actors who'd never considered profit participation started demanding it, pointing to what Clint had done with Dirty Harry. The entire structure of how talent was compensated began shifting because one actor had been willing to bet his salary on his own judgment. The lesson from that September 1971 negotiation wasn't about money, it was about belief. Everyone involved with Dirty Harry saw the same script, the same character, the same potential audience. The studio executives saw risk, controversy, and limited commercial appeal. Clint saw exactly what audiences wanted, even if they didn't know they wanted it yet. One of those perspectives was backed by data, research, and conventional wisdom. The other was backed by instinct, courage, and willingness to risk everything on being right. If this story of self-belief and calculated risk moved you, subscribe and share it with someone who needs to remember that sometimes the biggest mistake is listening to people who've already decided you'll fail, and that betting on yourself when everyone else has walked away isn't gambling, it's conviction. Have you ever believed in something everyone else dismissed? Share your story in the comments.